Over 700,000 tons of solid rock collapses the shaft, sealing the only exit. 33 men are buried alive, trapped 2,300 feet below the surface. The heat is suffocating, and the remaining food will only last 3 days. There is no radio signal and no way to call for a rescue. How do you survive in the dark when the world above assumes you are already dead? The San Jose copper and gold mine in Chile, a brutal place to work. It was a sprawling 120-year-old labyrinth carved directly into the heart of a highly unstable mountain. On August 5, 2010, the afternoon shift began completely normally. Heavy machinery rumbled down the spiraling dirt ramps, carrying men deep into the earth. The air was thick with diesel fumes and heavy rock dust, but deep underground, the structural integrity of the mountain was quietly failing. Around 2 p.m., the men noticed the rock walls, small pebbles rained down from the ceiling, and the stone groaned under immense, unnatural pressure. Experienced miners know exactly what that sound means. The mountain was actively shifting. Without warning, the entire geological fault line completely gave way. A single massive block of diorite rock sheared off from the mountain above them. This stone block was twice the size of the Empire State Building. It fell directly through the center of the mine, crushing the spiraling roadway. The impact triggered a massive shockwave through the miners to the ground. A blinding cloud of thick silica dust instantly filled the tunnels. They couldn't see their own hands in front of them. When the dust finally settled, 33 men gathered in the lower corridor. They drove their trucks up the ramp to inspect the primary exit. They found a solid wall of completely unyielding gray rock. The main artery of the mine permanently severed. They were trapped. The men immediately moved to the designated emergency refuge. It was a small, reinforced room carved into the stone, stocked with basic emergency provisions, but it was only designed to keep a small crew alive for 2 or 3 days. There were 33 hungry men standing in the dark. The shift supervisor, Luis Urzua, immediately took inventory of the survival raft. The reality entirely. They had a few cans of tuna, a box of crackers, and some expired. Urzua knew that sudden panic would kill them much faster than starvation. He instituted a brutal, strictly enforced rationing. Every 48 hours, each man received exactly 2 spoonfuls of tuna and half a cracker. They drank a single sip of spoiled milk to wash it. It was a starvation. Down in the lower levels, the environmental conditions were actively breaking. The ambient temperature hovered at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity, constant, suffocating 90%. The men were sweating heavily, losing vital fluids they simply could not replace. To survive the heat, they stripped down to their boots and underwear. They lay completely still on the rocky floor, trying to conserve every single calorie. But the mountain was not done moving. Massive aftershocks continued to rock the cavern, dropping heavy debris from the ceiling. Every time the ground shook, they braced for the final collapse. They were waiting for the ceiling to simply fall and crush them in the dark. Their headlamp batteries eventually died, plunging the refuge into absolute pitch-black darkness. They completely lost track of time. Above ground, the rescue was an absolute logistical nightmare. The Chilean government assembled a massive team of engineers and drilling experts, but they were effectively flying blind. The original maps of the mine were severely outdated, heavily inaccurate. The engineers had to drill small 6-inch exploratory holes straight down through solid rock. They were trying to hit a target the size of a small living room from half a mile away. It was mathematically identical to shooting a target in the dark. The first drill missed the refuge completely. The second drill drifted off course and hit empty rock. Days bled into weeks. The families of the trapped miners established a small tent city near the entrance. They called it Camp Hope, refusing to leave the perimeter. But privately, the authorities were already preparing body bags. No one had ever survived an underground disaster of this magnitude. Down in the refuge, the physical wasting was becoming lethal. 17 days had passed without a single drop of sunlight. The starvation was causing dangerous hallucinations. Some men walked into the dark tunnels alone, completely ready to give up. They could hear the faint sound of drilling from the surface, but the sound would grow louder and then slowly fade away as the drills missed their mark. It was psychological torture. Then, on the morning of August 22nd, A low vibration echoed directly above the cavern. It wasn't a collapsing wall. It was the rhythmic, mechanical grinding of an industrial drill bit. The men scrambled toward the sound as the heavy steel bit finally breached the ceiling of the tunnel they hadn't found. They frantically grabbed hammers and began striking the drill bit, signaling the surface. A miner named Jose Ojeda grabbed a piece of paper and a red marker. He wrote a simple, profound message in Spanish. "We are well in the shelter, the 33 of us." They attached the note to the drill with tape. They watched in silence as the steel bit was pulled back up to the world. When the drill breached the surface, engineers found the red letters. The discovery sent a massive shockwave of relief across the entire globe. They were actually alive. But cases like this don't end with a simple discovery. And if examining the dark limits of endurance is why you watch, subscribe to Evidence Zero, because finding them was only the beginning of the nightmare. The physical reality of their trap was entirely unchanged. The 6-inch drill hole was only wide enough to pass small plastic tubes down to the refuge. These tubes, nicknamed palomas, delivered vital hydration, medical supplies, and real food. The men were finally eating, but they were still buried under 2,000 feet of highly unstable rock. To get them out, engineers had to drill a completely new rescue shaft. It had to be wide enough to physically pull a grown man to the surface. The drilling process would take months. The government had to break the news to the men through a wired communication line. They told them they would not be rescued until Christmas. The psychological devastation of that timeline was immense. They had already survived 17 days in complete isolation. Now they had to sit in the suffocating heat for 2 more months. The risk of a complete mental breakdown was entirely real. If a single miner lost his mind in that cramped space, it could trigger violent chaos. Psychologists on the surface heavily monitored the men through a small fiber optic camera. They regulated their sleeping patterns by sending down artificial lights to mimic day and night. They strictly controlled the news that went down the tube. They kept the men busy. Ursua assigned daily jobs to every single miner to maintain rigid discipline. Some men were in charge of medical checks, while others cleared loose rock from the tunnels. They had to work together. The physical toll of the environment was still actively breaking their bodies. Many miners developed severe dental infection, painful fungal rashes from the extreme humidity. But the physical danger of the mountain was the ultimate threat. The massive drill boring the rescue shaft was causing heavy vibrations. There was a constant, terrifying risk that the rescue effort itself could trigger a secondary collapse. If the shaft collapsed, it would permanently entomb them. The drilling operation dragged on for over 50 days. 3 massive industrial rigs worked simultaneously, racing against the geological clock. The drill bits constantly broke against the heavy iron deposit in the rock. Engineers had to pull the entire rig up to replace the shattered steel. Finally, on October 9th, the secondary drill broke through the ceiling of the workshop near the refuge. The rescue shaft was complete, but the extraction method was highly experimental. The Chilean Navy had designed a custom steel rescue capsule named the Phoenix. It was a metal cylinder painted in the colors of the Chilean flag. It was exactly 21 inches wide. It was barely larger than a man's shoulders. To escape, each miner had to step inside this claustrophobic metal tube. They would be pulled up through half a mile of raw, unlined rock. If the capsule snagged on a jagged piece of stone, the cable could snap. If the tunnel collapsed during the ascent, the miner would be crushed instantly inside the metal cage. There was absolutely no backup plan. On October 12th, the rescue operation officially began. Florencio Avalos was chosen to go first, stepping quietly into the metal cylinder. He strapped on a biometric belt and a communication headset. The heavy steel door was locked from the outside. The winch slowly engaged. The capsule disappeared into the dark vertical shaft. For 16 agonizing minutes, the world watched the live broadcast in complete silence. The capsule scraped heavily against the rock walls. Every vibration sent a spike of fear through the command center, but the engineering held. The Phoenix broke the surface, and Avalos stepped out into the freezing night air. The extraction was working. Over the next 22 hours, The capsule made the terrifying journey 33 times. One by one, the men were pulled from the dark. They wore dark sunglasses to protect their eyes from the bright lights of the surface. They were physically exhausted, deeply emaciated, and completely overwhelmed by the crowds. Luis Ursua, the shift leader, was the absolute last man to leave the mine. He stepped out of the capsule, officially handing the shift over to the president of Chile. The 69-day nightmare was finally over. The rescue was heralded as an absolute miracle of human engineering and raw endurance. The miners became international heroes overnight, but the cameras eventually packed up, and the world moved on. The men had to return to their normal lives, but survival always leaves an invisible. Many of the miners suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They experienced crushing claustrophobia and violent nightmare. The physical darkness had been left behind, but the psychological weight of the mountain followed them to the surface. The San Jose mine was completely sealed off by the government. It was deemed too unstable for any future human operation. The massive block of diorite still sits perfectly in the dark. The empty refuge remains exactly as they left it. They pulled the man up. They sealed the massive shaft, but part of them never left the dark.